Hello, everyone. Conversation. I'm Nancy, Fishers and Farmers Partnership Outreach and Communications Lead, here today with my colleague and co-host, Amy Smith, in Iowa's Black Hawk Creek Water and Soil Coalition. We're so glad you joined us today. This new Boots on the Ground Conversation series is a program of Fishers and Farmers Partnership for the Upper Mississippi River Basin. It's a national fish habitat partnership, one of 20. Fishers and Farmers' goals is to thoughtfully, respectfully connect farmers and landowners, scientists, and all collaborators to listen and learn from each other and work together for resilient farms, streams, and fish. In addition to this series, we fund local projects, host workshops, and will soon be launching a radio program hosted by Pam Yankee on the Farm 97.7 broadcast nationwide from Madison, Wisconsin. Today, our conversation is scheduled for 1 hour with the option to stay on until 2:30 for a round of open questions with our guests. During this first hour, I'll share a few facts about the watershed, then introduce and interview our featured guests. After that, we'll move to breakout groups for 10 minutes and then share takeaways with the whole group. At 2, we'll move into your Q&A with the guests. A few facts about the watershed. The land in Black Hawk Creek watershed is among Iowa's richest, most productive farmland. It spans more than 217,000 acres in Grundy, Tama, and Black Hawk counties. In hydrologic unit codes, it's classified as a 10, or a 5th level basin. The watershed spans 217,000 acres in Grundy, Tama, and Black Hawk counties. So you can see here that Black Hawk Creek watershed is the red outlined area, and the white is the Middle Cedar, which is in central Iowa. The creek itself begins in central Iowa's Grundy County and flows northeast through Black Hawk County to join the Cedar River in Waterloo, the watershed's largest city. Cities of Rhinebeck, Grundy Center, Dyke, Stout, Holland, Morrison, and Cedar Falls are also in the basin. More than 85% of the watershed is cultivated farmland. But in the landscape of corn and soybean fields, Black Hawk Creek's timbered banks and wildlife habitats stand out. The watershed's public lands include more than 350 acres of parks with trails. And the lower section of the creek near Waterloo is a favorite place for paddlers. Warm water game and non-game fish and invertebrates live in Black Hawk Creek, with 30 fish species in the lower reaches near the Cedar River. But at the same time, in spite of these assets, all major stretches of Black Hawk Creek show signs of environmental stress. And it's listed as an impaired waterway by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Water levels fluctuate quickly and often, causing flooding and bank sloughing, and major sections of the stream have high E. coli bacteria counts and turbidity, and it carries an average of 2,720 tons of nitrates to the Cedar River every year. But while problems exist, there are a lot of people who want to make a change. So now we'll meet them. I'm pleased to introduce today 3 active landowners who are doing something about the condition of Black Hawk Creek, and their watershed coordinator, who says she is thrilled to be living her absolute dream job. First, I'd like you to meet Fred Abels. Fred farms in the Holling Creek watershed, and he's a commissioner for the Grundy County Soil and Water Conservation Board. Jack Boyer farms near Rhinebeck and has been an advocate for sustainable farming for many, many years. Jack is a commissioner for Tama County Soil and Water Conservation Board. Clark Porter farms near Hudson and now works as a watershed project coordinator in Black Hawk County. He was an original member of the Black Hawk Creek Water and Soil Coalition and initiated the coalition. Vern Fish was going to join us, but unfortunately he's not here. And finally, we have Faith Luce. She's the current Black Hawk Creek Watershed Project Coordinator and works with the coalition as an advisory board. We are so glad
Hi,
you're
Nancy.
Hi. We're so glad you're here. And there's so much we want to know. But before we start with questions, listeners, as the stories roll out today, listen in for actions and personal qualities that help this group get through things they didn't know, barriers they hadn't crossed before. These can be personal, technical, or in the community. Think about as you listen to these reflections, how did the actions of these people and their qualities combine to help them reach some goals? Even keep a list if you have a pencil nearby. And also, you're welcome as we talk to put questions you may have in chat, and I'll start with those later when we do the Q&A. Be sure you direct those questions to me in the chat because otherwise I will not be able to see them. So I want to say I met this group for the first time in 2017, exactly 3 years ago, when hosting a multi-day workshop. It was just 9 months after the group got started, and I remember Clark and Fred that you were so curious and you listened so hard to everything. And you had this energy that just showed you'd made up your minds to do something. So to those of you who were there then at the workshop or part of that startup, what put that fire in you?
Fred, do you want to go first? Or? I'll step in. I'm one of those people that always fills in if there's any gap in conversation. So somebody's got to stop me. I just feel like that's my, I don't know, existential responsibility for some reason. But what put the fire or energy in us, I guess, is really just our at least I can speak for myself, just the sense of the great need that the stream had and of the scope and magnitude of what we were dealing with, both in terms of the size of the watershed, as well as many of the challenges and issues that the watershed faced. And so it was, it was really, I guess, mission driven, to borrow a term from the corporate world, and continues to be, I think. And that was it. And just a little bit of anger even about the fact that throughout this nation and throughout the Midwest, we've abused our national resources so much.
There seems to be this there has to be a realization, and then clearly, Clark, you and others made a decision to start moving and do something. What'd you do? How did you get started? Where did you even begin?
Well, I didn't know what in the heck I was doing from the very beginning, and it could be argued that maybe I still don't. But I had no, I didn't know who to speak with exactly. I was concerned about the creek. I was aware of all the various issues that you listed in your introduction about the creek, and have grown up on the banks of the creek my entire life. I've hiked, paddled, ridden horses through the area. Always kind of had one foot planted out there. One of our farms borders the stream, and so there was that concern, but I didn't know who to talk to, and so I just started speaking with anybody that would listen. Basically, any official body. The first group I went to was the Blackhawk County Board of Supervisors, and they actually, they were sympathetic. They listened to me, but they didn't really have any jurisdiction over the stream. And I think that's an issue that I might point out to people that are trying to do this is that's one of the problems with watersheds is that they extend across jurisdictions and underneath, county borders and fence lines and city zones. And so it's kind of difficult to determine who has jurisdiction over this, who can do something. And that does vary by state and county and everything else. So it was, for me, that was kind of a quest then, was just to speak with people that could finally perhaps have some leverage, offer some funds, and at the same time, we recognized that we needed to kind of develop an official body. So we developed a board after a while. We just met spontaneously as a group for almost a year and a half. But we tried to have an agenda. I tried to develop a kind of a history behind us of here's what we've talked about, here's what we need to talk about next, so that we could get this sense of connection and continuity. You need both, connection and continuity. And then it was just a matter of finding people. And thank God there's a lot of people scattered around who are interested in these issues, and you just have to find them.
So in that first year and a half, who was at those meetings? Was it a big group? Who came?
It varied in size, but we would have up to 15 or 20 local landowners and farmers. The conservation board was hosted for us. One of the county supervisors started coming out. Fred was there, and that was the second group I spoke with, was the Grundy County Commissioners, Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioners, and that's when we started getting some legs under the whole project, because they too were interested and had noted concerns about the creek for a while. So we also had people from other watershed groups. We had the representative from the Watershed Management Authority and the Cedar River, which was actually a part of a HUD grant that was awarded to Cedar Rapids. And I get and some people that just had an interest in the creek as paddlers and amateur naturalists, hikers.
Mm-hmm. So how did you invite them? Was it personal? Did you advertise? How did you reach out to find all those people in such a big place?
Contact lists and recommendations. It was very common for people to say, you should talk to so-and-so, and so then I began towards, as we got more of us on board, reached out for those people that they recommended to us. One person that also had a great deal of leverage was Mary Beth Stevenson, who was the basin coordinator for the Middle Cedar for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. And I was fortunate enough to speak with her early on, and she eventually is the person who largely authored the grant, along with Grundy County Soil and Water Conservation District, to get Faith on and her position on board. So that's just, I think that's the advice would be just listen to, ask for recommendations. Who should I talk to next? What group or committee? Or I spoke to churches, I spoke to civic groups, I spoke to anybody, and then listen to recommendations for who to speak to next.
Did you start with a plan? I mean, did you have any idea what you were like? Did you have a path charted in your head, or did that come as you went along?
At the beginning, it was about as spontaneous as falling off a ladder. But after a while, there started to be a plan. I began to see maybe who we could talk with, and began to realize that we had to figure out how to organize our meetings in a way that people didn't feel like they were wasting their time coming to them. We were stuck spinning our wheels for a while, right? And we'd come back and we could talk more about the creek, and about the needs in the watershed, but taking that next step of having leverage and having dollars and all that kind of stuff we need to work towards that. And for that, we needed a little bit more sophisticated structure so that people didn't feel like they were wasting their time. And so I think structuring the group sort of serves as a catalyst for developing a more sophisticated plan and asking, what do you think we ought to do? Having kind of like a focus group early on.
Was your goal focused on the whole watershed, the communities, the city of Waterloo, or primarily agricultural areas? Did you have a vision for, like, was your core purpose that you were going to have change practices on the land, on the farmland primarily, or was it rural, I guess, primarily, or not?
Yeah, I can. I'm conscious of the fact I don't know whether Fred is back on yet or not, or.
I'm
Fred?
trying to get there.
Hey, Fred.
Oh, Fred.
Now you can hear me. I
Yep.
can't.
Yeah, we sure can.
We can't see the video of me, but
I'm glad to hear you're back on, Fred. We were just talking about the vision you all carried in the beginning. And if you were focused primarily on reaching out to farm landowners and thinking about farm practices, or if you were trying to bring in the people in the small communities in Waterloo, Cedar Falls, just what did you have in mind in the beginning?
all of the above. Anybody that would listen to Clark. No, I mean, it takes a whole community. You know, that's something we learned at the Fishers and Farmers, the meeting in 2017. No one group. I mean, it can't be just the farmers. It can't be the landowners. It takes a community coming together to make this work, and that's something our the Blackhawk Soil and Water Coalition did. I mean, we had not as many urban people on it as I'd have liked to seen, but um, yeah, it was working good.
I think there's a dynamic we had to be aware of too, Nancy, at the beginning. And I mean, it's true for, you know, how psychologists give you the Rorschach or that ink blot test, you know, where they, or where, you know, there's a big, looks like a cloud shape of ink on a paper and they say, what do you see there? And a watershed is kind of the same way. Everybody sees something different in the watershed and relates to it a little bit differently. And some see nothing at all. They're not even aware that they live in a watershed. I'd hazard a guess, perhaps most. Um, and I think probably one of the important connections to make, and the groups to try to not have alienate each other is producers and people who make a living off the land near the stream and who, by very virtue of their life, their you know, their business, their legacy as farmers, et cetera. I mean, they have some you know, unique characteristics compared to somebody who may recreationally paddle or fish on the stream. And so the important thing, I think, is like your organization, to get those groups working together rather than becoming antagonists. And I'm very glad that as we, you know, as they bring on urban folks, like I'm still involved with the coalition, but due to my job now, I'm a volunteer with the organization. I'm no longer on the board because of working for the state. But what I'm really hoping to see and still see energy behind is that, you know, it's going to become a water trail pretty soon. Blackhawk Creek is. It's designated by the state DNR as a paddling trail, and there will be an increasing number of recreational users. And it will be really great to be able to tell those recreational users, look at what the farmers and everybody upstream are already doing, you know, for this stream that all of us share. And so I've spoken enough, but I think it's just important to keep those groups united as opposed to dividing over their various interests in the resource.
You've spoken a few times to me, all of you, about how rapidly this group has evolved. I mean, it's not very long. You've done a lot in a few years. And of course that involves resources. And you made reference to that, Clark, that Mary Beth had helped you with that. But can you talk a little bit for others who don't know your group and your work about when you started to move from just gathering people, you went into a planning phase, a formal planning phase, I believe, and then resources came after that. Can you talk a little bit about how you moved that along, and I guess how you got from that initial startup place to really visualizing the work on the ground and how you were going to get that done?
I think listening to like Mary Beth, I wish I could think of all the names that helped us along. We just had a lot of help with getting organized, and I guess everybody cared about Black Hawk Creek to stick with it. Wouldn't you say that was kind of the?
That's exactly it. I think in an earlier conversation I'd shared that you could drop Alka-Seltzer into a glass and nothing's going to happen, but we dropped it into a full glass. I mean, there were people that were interested, and our interest kind of drew them together. So and they were willing to help. Some of the other groups that helped us were the Iowa Ag Water Alliance, that was Jim Jordan, Iowa Soybean Association, the Watershed Management Authority, Vern Fish, former director of Blackhawk County Conservation Board. Vern is now the president of the coalition, and yeah, he couldn't join us today, but he was immensely helpful. Early on, lots of those people, and especially Vern, were saying, we've got to get boots on the ground. We got to get somebody out there whose full-time job is to develop conservation practices on the ground. And until we do that, we're going to be spinning our wheels. And we were lucky enough through the Watershed Management Authority to run into the Iowa Ag Water Alliance, and they had some money to free up. They paid the Soybean Association to help do some plans. Because early on I heard, you're not going to get funding until you have a formal plan, but you need money to get a formal plan. So it's like catch-22. What do you do with that? And so we got some funding to develop formal plans. And then those formal watershed plans, which were kind of a group community process, facilitated by the Soybean Association. And those served as a platform then for going after the funding with the state so that they could get an initial grant. But and I don't know how this might vary with other listeners in other states or jurisdictions, but that formal plan in our area was critical.
Was the initial money you went for after you got the plan intended to hire a coordinator? Was that the main purpose? Okay.
Yes, and simultaneously for that coordinator to develop plans for edge of field practices like saturated buffers and bioreactors, and then now it's gone through a second phase, and now it's putting those practices on the ground as well as cover crops and other. And there's a second grant phase now that Faith is working with. So.
Faith, I'm interested in, I'm sure everyone's interested now in hearing what you're actually doing day to day. And I'm particularly, if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to bring what started as a very active volunteer group of citizens together with your full-time work. It seems like a great combination, but can you talk about that a little bit?
It is really nice to have the coalition just kind of as an advisory board, because when I started on this position, I really didn't know what I was doing basically and what their goal for me was. And so just to be able to have them to answer these questions for me and just kind of push me in the right direction and encourage me to have my own goals and ideals for what I want the watershed to look like in the next 3 years, because that's when we go up for another grant renewal. Mm-hmm. So it's been really, really helpful.
Yeah. So what practice are you promoting now, and how are you approaching people, and how are they responding?
Yeah, so right now we are really pushing edge of field practices. So that would be like expo reconstruction, saturated buffers, bioreactors, wetlands, stuff like that. We also do push cover crops, and this year was one of our largest years of cover crops. I think we had around 9,000 acres of cover crops, which is huge. So far, we really haven't had to reach out to a lot of producers. We've had quite a few of them that are just constantly flowing into the office, asking if they can have these practices established on their fields. So we still have a lot of the community and the producers that are asking these questions. I mean, there will come a point where we will have to go out and kind of talk to the producers on our own to kind of start that conversation, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Can Can you do you link that interest at all to the work that was done by Clark and Fred and Vern and everyone before that? Did it
I
create?
definitely do. And I also think the work of other people that are in the office that I work in, because they also have been very involved with the community and the conservation efforts in the community and have been for a while. So I think that helped a lot, and having those other employees having connections with landowners too.
Mhm. Think on, how does your leadership make a difference? I mean, you invested a lot of time and your values are deeply embedded. If you weren't involved, would people around you understand watershed and soil issues as well, or look at adopting practices in the same way? Don't be shy. I'm just really curious about what kind of energy your work may have created that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
It's helped a few of my neighbors give cover crops a try and maybe adapt to using them. Also, Steve Hensey on our SWCD board, and I don't remember, he was one of the first ones to sign up for a wetland.
Mm-hmm.
And that one just kind of, I give Steve a hard time about, using cover crops or no-till, and then which he hasn't tried that yet. But here he was one of the first ones to, hey, let's put a wetland in, and that was a unbelievable moment for me.
Hmm.
So
Why is that, Fred? Why was that unbelievable?
I just wasn't expecting him to do something like that. It's just to a certain degree, it's kind of unlike him. I guess that's the best way I could say it. But he farms around Dike, and the wetland will be constructed, I think, Faith, west of Dike.
It's just a little bit southwest of Dike, yeah, and that
Okay.
will be constructed this upcoming fall after the end of harvest.
But yeah, it's people that are, you don't expect them to take an interest, and yet they will. I guess they just need to be shown how they can make a difference in different ways, in small ways. So
Do you perceive that they saw what you were doing on some fronts and got interested that way?
well, I think Steve, being a soil commissioner, was at a lot of the meetings and listened to others, and I think that's where he made up his mind to do this.
Yeah, I think, well, Fred and Jack are both being modest too. In a way, they're both real models for stewardship of the land, and people watch what they're doing and are interested, and they both are actively involved with conservation efforts and speaking to groups. And Jack does a lot of on-farm research for Practical Farmers of Iowa, as does Fred. And Practical Farmers of Iowa is also an ally in these efforts for water quality and soil health. And what I might add too is that it helps in talking with people, I think, to be able to say, as I've said and continue to say to farmers who I speak with, I'm not asking people to do what I haven't tried myself, nor am I condemning them for doing things that I have never done. I mean, every tillage, using too much nitrogen, tiling maybe where you shouldn't, you name it. I mean, I've done all of those things. I don't feel good about it, but in retrospect, you know, but I guess the point is that we learn as we go along, and you know, we're not asking for somebody to be a conservation all-star right from the beginning, or to be. This is a learning process. You know, you're forgiven. It's human, but likewise, you know, we have I think a duty to learn and try to do better each year. So that's all. It's just, I think it helps in that manner, in that, because it's really not, nobody likes to be preached to, right? No matter where they are. And so I think by being a landowner and trying it, you aren't really preaching, you're just modeling.
Well, it's time for us to stop the interview. Thank you so much for all you've shared. Now you all will have a chance to think with others who are on this call about what you've heard. We know the work is challenging and there's no one recipe for success. Every place, every community is different, and every group has to find its own way due to the social differences and the landscape differences. But our question is, in this group, in Black Hawk Creek Water and Soil Coalition, in this watershed, what actions and human qualities came together to tip the balance towards some progress?
Thank you.
The question is, what kind of actions or human qualities did you hear about in the stories that came together to tip the balance towards progress for this group? And I'll start with a couple that I heard. I was jotting some things down while they were talking. I think that one of the first things that I heard Clark say was that he started talking to whomever would listen to him about his interests and sort of dreams for the watershed. So just that willingness to share the story and then also to listen in return and, you know, pay attention to what other folks were saying. Anybody else capture something they want to share?
That it does involve everybody from the community, both the urban and rural people, and working with really everybody, getting everybody engaged.
Yeah.
Long term.
What was that, Jim?
Long-term thinking, because you can't
Yeah.
take care of most of these things. It's overnight.
Yeah.
This is Jeff. Having seen several groups over my tenure, to have a diverse group is great, but it still takes a core element of probably 3 or 4 people who are willing to go that extra mile, who are willing to host the first meetings, who are willing to make the phone calls, who are willing to go out and present at partners meetings. So you must have a core element of I call them ambassadors. And the ambassadors are, their primary purpose is to build the network. And without that core, I've seen a lot of good projects with a lot of good partners, but nobody was willing to step forward, and they slowly died.
Yeah, so, that's a good point.
That is an excellent point. Thank you.
Another thing in talking about the diversity of the groups involved, they kind of seem to acknowledge right up front that all of those groups weren't going to have necessarily the same interests, but to kind of try to unite those interests and maybe find a balance, or at least not to let it be divisive amongst the groups. Did I capture that accurately, Clark?
Yeah, I would agree. Some groups I didn't even mention, because really in the course of that period of time, we've, you know, talked to so many, but on the initial board, then a member of the Farm Bureau, and we've maintained connections with the Farm Bureau, and and then agribusiness with a local agribusiness vendor. And those connections have been retained as well. And I think it's just critical to get all of those people together under one tent.
I also thought that the willingness for the first year and a half to sort of just not have a formal structure, not have a plan, just, you know, go a little loose and just easy to figure things out, is you got to kind of embrace that and be willing to do that. So that was another thing that I took note of.
Yeah, I wish there were a way around that, and maybe there is. It just was something we went through. But I think you can run the risk of organizing it too soon also, and possibly excluding some voices that you need, or adopting a structure that doesn't work out too well. And there's a balance there you have to be listening for. And I think it just needs to be openly acknowledged. I mean, we didn't try to pretend at meetings that we really knew what was going on. I mean, I'm holding the agenda, but that doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about. I mean, you just have to, it really helps.
Yeah. Anything else anybody wants me to capture for our report out?
Thank you again, Sherry.
Watershed group that we
You're welcome.
started, beer and pizza made a big difference to getting people there.
Sure.
Good timing on the ending too. I'm just about to close the breakout room, so.
I've heard,
Perfect.
Good job, everyone.
I've heard pie.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I believe we're back. We want to hear what's on your minds now. Group leaders, if you haven't put your name and group number in the chat yet, please do it now. Put your first and last name and your group number.
But group 1 is Sherry Fisher.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Some of the actions and human qualities that we captured out of group 1 that really helped this group get started was the diversity of embracing all different kinds of groups that were involved, both urban and rural, and also working to unite those groups and their interests and not let them be something that divided the groups. As much as we talked about the willingness to kind of go free and easy in the beginning and figure things out, we talked about the importance of having a really core team of, you could almost call ambassadors that are willing to really step up and show up and do the work in order for things to continue. The willingness to just start having the conversation, to reach out to people who would talk about the watershed and the interests and see where that would lead. The encouraging the collaboration amongst different kinds of groups, reaching out and not necessarily having a long-term goal, but taking that one step at a time. And then Tom in our group also mentioned that beer and pizza never hurts anything when you're starting out.
Good timing there. Your minute is up. We will move on. I don't have anyone from group 2 yet, but we'll move on to group 3, which is Faith. Faith, you can turn your microphone on and your 1 minute starts now.
Alrighty, so a couple of the qualities that we talked about that were important in progressing the group was just personalities of those involved in the coalition, not being scared to reach out to people, not being scared to reach out to the wrong people, and not getting discouraged. The relationships that the coalition members had with local and state partnerships was really critical in advancing the group, as well as having a lot of the coalition members being farmers in the community, so that we didn't have that gap between producers and conservationists. It was a pretty level playing field. And then we were able to pretty much expand to other producers in a pretty easy fashion.
Okay, Josh, go for it. You're up.
Okay. So in our group, we discussed the importance of having a champion And I think in this regard, Clark was definitely the champion for the water quality effort here. And having that motivated person to kind of steer the ship definitely helps. But then it's important to use to kind of form a small nucleus for conservation, and then start to build the network out from there. So utilizing the people and their connections, and then helping it grow, which, like I said, I think in this one was definitely an organic process of folks just kind of leaning on each other and building from there. I think that's why Black Hawk Creek has really been successful, and what could be replicated in other areas.
Fred is the group 2 leader.
I guess we came up with, you need some leaders in the community to step forward and not be, I guess, afraid of the failure or afraid of what other people said. And also we were successful with people helping us, such as the Iowa Ag Water Alliance, the Iowa Soybean Association, and the desire to improve things.
Thank you, Fred. Jack, you said you were with group two. I'm wondering if you're with group 4. Either way, unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, hi, group 2. So a lot of the same things. It really takes a leader. So when I heard the local landowners talk about stepping up, they took the initiative. That was really important, and they stayed on it. Communication is huge across landowners and local units of governments to keep everybody on board. And then trust each other. Trust that the process is going to have some hiccups and bumps in the road, but work it through. Don't give up. And then share your stories, share your successes, share what didn't work. But those are things we heard. And then really that the human quality was, I think, what was mentioned, that the history of trying things that didn't work. I thought it was going to work, but today it's different. That land stewardship practice was huge. So there's buy-in across across the spectrum, because people are engaged, and communication was the key.
All right. That is all 5 groups. Nancy, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Thank you all for the thoughtful reflections. Clearly, we all saw the heartfelt effort that everyone made and in this group, and the results it's created so far. It's very exciting. We thank you, Black Hawk Creek Soil and Water Conservation, or Water and Soil Coalition, for sharing your story, and everyone for listening so clearly and well. I asked the steering committee when we decided to do this series what they would like people to know and walk away from this series with. And interestingly, the biggest message I heard was help people see that it's a messy process and that there really is no perfect way forward. And that's exactly what you all just said in a lot of ways, that it takes a lot of people, a lot of courage, a lot of meetings, a lot of connection, but it works. So we are at the end of our hour. It's 2 minutes to 2. I'm happy to say that the Black Hawk Creek folks have agreed to be available to answer your questions as time goes on, and you want to reach out if you have new thoughts or you have specific questions for them. Faith has said she will take your questions, and you can reach her at faith.luce, that's LUCE, at ia.nacdnet. That's faith.luce at ia.nacdnet.net. or 319-842-3634. Thank you so much, Faith, for being willing to do that.
Yeah, no problem.
You got, Nancy, you got two of the numbers reversed. It should be,
Did I?
yeah, 824.
Okay, 824-3634. Thank you, Fred. We're at the 2 o'clock hour, and I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming. We had more than 65, I think Amy said at the last minute, we had 70 people on this call. And you represent all 5 states of the upper Mississippi River Basin and areas beyond. So it is so exciting to have you here. If you need to leave us now before the Q&A, you certainly may, but before we do, I'd like everyone to turn on their video and go to the top right of their Zoom screen and choose gallery view so we can all see each other. So if you ever feel like you're alone in this work, think of these faces. And before we take off, let's just all wave, and we so look forward to seeing you in a month. December 17th, we plan to be featuring groups every month on the 3rd Thursday at 1 o'clock. So what we'd like you to do now is, if you have a question, just physically raise your hand and we will call on you, and you can unmute yourself and ask your questions directly.
I have a question. This is Sherry. Can I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. And Faith talked about this just a little bit in terms of what kind of outreach you're doing, that right now there's still folks coming to you and you're not really going to them. But I was wondering if you're sort of geographically tracking where things are happening within the watershed to plan towards areas where there might be holes that you want to reach out to later.
Yep, so I am currently tracking all of our edge of field and infield practices on GIS. And so we have 3 main priority watersheds out of the 10 watersheds that make up Black Hawk Creek. And so a lot of our efforts from here on are going to be focused on those priority watersheds. And so we are tracking that geographically because of that extent. But there is also a plan of trying to remove a lot of the fields that are within the 100-year floodplain out of the 100-year floodplain as well, just because they've been massively unproductive for probably like 3 out of 5 years of production. So we have been also tracking that geographically, and it's all been through GIS pretty much.
There is a question in chat. I have to relocate it here. This is from Lori Scoville. Can you describe the funding that you've used?
Yeah, so it is, I'm going to be honest, it's complicated. There is a lot of funding and a lot of different sources that make up that funding. I've only been on the job for about 3 months and I'm still trying to figure it out. And it probably will be for the next like couple years. But a lot of our funding comes from IDOLs. We have like CRP, we have EQIP, we have some other state funding. We get, there's other different organizations like Iowa Ag Water that would supply funding for like watershed signs and best management practices signs and stuff like that. So it's very complicated, but there's always going to be available funds for something that you want to get done within the watershed, is what I've found out.
Nancy, can I go?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jack Lauer. Just to maybe Clark or Fred, when, or any landowner for that matter, this is that trust thing where, is there one entity, at least in your county, your project, your watershed, local unit of government, one local unit of government that you really trusted and was key to keeping, you know, the programmatic things together?
I would say it was our SWCD. Don't you, Clark?
Yes, I think because because it was central to the mission of the SWCD, Soil and Water Conservation District. So that became, kind of our home and the Black Hawk County SWCD was also very interested, remains very interested in the progress. And Vern, I see Vern's on now. Vern is an assistant commissioner with the Black Hawk County Soil and Water Conservation District. Well, now you're a commissioner, Vern. As a matter of fact, you just went through the election. So
yeah, January 4th. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get to cuss and swear on the 4th.
Anyway, so yeah, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and then Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. Once the grants were awarded, then there's there's assistance, there's a hierarchy, there are people to go to, there's some history there about how to operate and what to fund, and Natural Resource Conservation Service. Also, long history there in the county and lots of help in both counties, Grundy and Black Hawk. So I don't know if those become, once we got established, those became the, shall we say, the foundation blocks.
I should also mention the Grundy SWCDs. We've got a super bunch.
They are.
Yeah, they're ready to pitch in and roll up their shirt sleeves and go to work. And everything fell into place so well with this. But I got to hand it to Clark. If he wouldn't come to us, I don't know if we'd be sitting here right now talking about the fruits of our labor.
Fred, the only thing else I would add to that, maybe it's already come up, but didn't the Grundy County supervisors give you $5,000 to the SW to assist in this project? So you actually had some county money.
Yeah. Yep.
That was for a small county like Grundy. That's a huge chunk of change.
Well, for any county, it's a pretty good chunk of change to an SWCD.
And again, I'm jumping into this late, but the other thing I'll throw in, and maybe Clark's already talked about this, is that obviously watersheds don't follow political boundaries. Political boundaries are squares, and watersheds aren't. And so, both Grundy and Black Hawk are working on this together. And I think that's another admirable point to this, is that we're looking outside of the box, and actually, Faith's job is she's got 2 priority workshops in Grundy County and 1 priority watershed in Black Hawk County. So we really do look at this as a cooperative effort, and we're trying to work our way across those political boundaries, which get in the way, to be honest.
Would you have been doing that without this coalition starting? Were you doing some of that before?
No. And if Clark hadn't come to a Black Hawk Soil and Water meeting and posed this idea, I wouldn't have gotten engaged in it. I mean, I live in town. I'm not a producer. And it's like Fred and I kind of talked, and my driver on this is I live right by the creek. I play on it all the time. I paddle, I ski, I hike it. But I recognize that I've got to work with the upstream users to ensure that quality resource stays there for me to enjoy. And so I probably would not have engaged if Clark hadn't come in and said, we need to work on this together. And it's like, yeah, I'll buy into this.
So once Clark, this is to all of you, Vern and Fred and Faith, but once Clark kind of got this going, did other people become catalysts? I mean, was it kind of like a ball that grew as it rolled along?
Well, Clark can answer this better than I. Yeah, but Clark had already done all the field work. He'd already talked to all the influencers, the people that make a difference, and got them on board. And some of that, I think, was by peer pressure and bent arms. I don't know, but he played the role to get those people to come to the table. And so that was critical to to whatever success we've had, and I guess the success is we've gotten 2 grants to bring in a watershed coordinator, because I still remember Fred sitting in a meeting going, and we were talking about goals. He said, we got to have boots on the ground. We got to have somebody knock on doors. And then we went, okay, that makes sense. So then it became a matter of all us working together and coordinating our letters of endorsement and trying to get the funding to make this happen. And again, we're going into our total of 4 years of soft money, 1 year down, and we're into the next 3. But I think that is what makes this thing work, is you got both inside government and outside government supporting it and writing letters of recommendation. And that just makes the funders look at it and go, okay, this is the grassroots movement. It isn't just government people trying to raise money for their own programs. And if we've had any success, that's part of it. Now, the challenge is how you hold this together. And I guess that's what I struggle with is, that's why I pushed Faith to come up with a 3-year plan. Where's this going to end in 3 years? She tells me she's got it. She hasn't shared it with me yet, but and part of that is the sustainability piece. So what do we do when we come to the end of the grant? What's the next step? With Josh is on this call, he was very involved in the Dry Run Creek project in Cedar Falls with the Blackhawk Soil and Water, and that's now been taken over with state money. So to me now that's become sustainable. It's there, and Josh can add to that if he wants. And same thing with Miller Creek, which Clark is involved with in Blackhawk County. So to me the challenge is to get past that initial stage and have a sustainable program, because I will argue that watershed improvements are multi-generational. It took us a couple centuries to get where we're at. It's going to take a couple of generations to start moving the needle. And so if you don't have a sustainable plan, a 3-year grant is a blip in geologic time. So Faith, get on that 3-year plan.
It is ever changing.
Faith, you might, if you don't mind, would you talk a little bit about it? When we spoke on the phone earlier, it just poured out of you when I asked what you were doing and what was on the table. So I think people would be really interested in knowing how you're going about it and what you're doing.
Yeah, so a lot of these are just my ideas and what I would like to see the watershed look like at the end of 3 years, or even like 20 years down the road. This is just a very long term of me setting up framework for what I want the watershed to look like. And a lot of this was spurred on by Vern and conversations with other people from the coalition. But one of the big things for me is because this watershed is huge. It's very massive. It's a lot for one person to kind of manage and get boots on the ground in every area and reach as many producers as I can to meet the needs of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, which is basically the goal of these watershed improvement projects in Iowa. And so to do that, I want to have at least a watershed project coordinator for each of the priority watersheds. So that would be adding 2 additional coordinators, which would take a lot of funding, but I think it would be extremely beneficial to meet those needs and to be able to meet those resource concerns. Another thing is to create more green space within the county, because we really don't have that much. And a lot of that does have to do with how much ag land that we have, which isn't a terrible thing, but we want to take, like I said earlier, the land out of the 100-year floodplain, because that is just not super productive, and to turn that into green space and to have that, maybe 15, 20 years down the road as public land. So those are kind of the 2 main ideas that I have currently. So
does when you think about that type of goal, that requires a lot of collaboration. Are those relationships in place because of what you've done the last 3 years?
We have started, especially for the 100-year floodplain kind of idea, we have started to build those relationships with those entities that would be included like 10 years down the road. And I have been introduced to those people by Vern. And so we've had a Zoom meeting to just kind of introduce ourselves and kind of start with that relationship and collaboration before even doing anything like that. So I think that has been helpful because people on the coalition know who to reach out to and they have those connections. So that's extremely beneficial for me.
Anyone else? I'm not sure I can see everyone's image on my little screen, so just speak up if you have a question.
This is Sherry. I have a question. In terms of getting landowners out of the 100-year floodplain, at least in Missouri, a lot of times those landowners, even if it's not a productive year, are getting crop insurance payments. Do you see that as an impediment for the incentive to move out and create green spaces?
Yes, yeah, that definitely would stop it. But I mean, we already do have quite a bit of the land along the 100-year floodplain spanning Rhinebeck. A lot of that has already been moved to like CRP and stuff like that. So while it is an impediment, I don't think it completely disrupts that process and that goal.
Can I jump in? My
Yeah,
previous career, I was the County Conservation Board Executive Director, and the standard line was I'd get a call from somebody in the floodplain, and they would argue that dad got a crop 3 out of 5 years, and now I'm being flooded 3 out of 5 years. I want to farm. I don't want to drain. I don't want to mess around with that wet ground. And so I think flooding by itself is going to push people to make that jump, because you're right. They can put it in the farm program, which is good. I mean, that serves the ecological purpose. It doesn't provide public access and recreation. But my observation is that people want to farm, and they don't really necessarily want to grow prairie grass. They want to farm. And so being able to do a 1031 and switch out may be the goal for some people. And we just need to be in the position to take advantage of that and help them accomplish that life goal. Recognizing that there are some people who are going to stay there because flood insurance and farm programs allow them to stay.
This is Jeff. I can't do my video because I don't have that choice on my buttons for some odd reason. But anyhow, in terms of a project, I work with the Department of Agriculture. I'm familiar with the people in Des Moines who are the decision makers as far as a lot of the grant sources and stuff. And one thing that the projects have to admit, as far as Blackhawk Creek, they're in the Middle Cedar. There are already 3 successful watershed projects within the Middle Cedar. And that creates a culture in Des Moines where they're looking at these projects going, that's a hot area. There are people there that are on staff in these various soil and water conservation districts who know what they're doing. And as a result of that, in a way, Blackhawk kind of got on the coattails of those previous projects. That helped give credibility to the districts, that helped give credibility to the land. So when we're talking about working with your area, with your partners at the local level, which is extremely important, don't forget to kind of work with the funding agencies that are located in maybe your state capital. Having a relationship with them where they know you on the first name basis and vice versa can really pay dividends. They're looking to make investments with like in Iowa, it's a water quality initiative right now, which is funding this project. They got $15 million a year to fund watershed projects. They're looking for good investments because they ultimately have to answer to the legislature, and they don't want to have a bunch of disasters. So anywhere where they can get confidence, anywhere where they can know the people locally and have a good relationship with them, that pays dividends in the long run. So don't be afraid to cater to those funding sources as well during your development stage, because it'll pay dividends when you move over to implementation.
Jeff, does the fact that landowners really started this work in this area or started the growth of it make a difference at the state level when they're evaluating overall?
Big difference. The worst thing that can happen from the state level's point of view is to give a $200,000 to $400,000 grant to a project that does nothing. And after 3 or 4 years, they have to answer why was that money obligated and nothing happened. By having the landowners on board, they know that that money is going to get turned into action. Something's going to happen. And as a result, it just makes a much wiser and safer investment on their part to, you know, to isolate and give you guys a grant. There's less chance of a failure. And so by having the farm group on board, they know the landowners are going to at least be open to consider alternatives. And so that all resonates very well.
You can't impose on people. I mean, it depends on, you know, if there's a regulatory structure or not. I mean, I think that's that's kind of the elephant in the room, right? Sometimes it's talking about regulations and whether there would be regulatory impositions for water quality. And I know states differ on that. But in our state, you know, they definitely are leaning towards trying to have everything be, or most everything be voluntary. I mean, there are regulations about handling manure and other things that are overseen by the Department of Natural Resources and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. But for these water quality efforts like we're doing right now, I mean, the idea is that it would be voluntary, and that we're looking for people to step up, landowners to step up and support them. So when you get this effort coming, this grassroots effort coming up, then that, you know, that really fits with the model that is trying to be replicated across the state. And so that makes a huge difference. And I'm sure it probably would anywhere.
There's a question in the chat from Heidi, and that is, has this group shared with other farmer-led groups, and have other farmer-led groups reached out to you?
None have reached out. And I've spoken with one that was started in Dubuque County, Jeff Pape, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And had spoken with him in the past. But in my immediate recollection, none have reached out to us. We haven't, I went to some meetings for the South Fork of the Iowa River at the beginning as well, because they're a successful watershed group. And I was kind of curious about how they got there and what they were doing. And they're actually at 501c3, I believe, which is something we were originally thinking about. Anyway, no, without your organization, Nancy and Amy, and this opportunity to have this kind of, and the Sand County Foundation and some other organizations, there really wouldn't be the opportunity for networking to occur between these various disparate groups.
This is Jeff again. For most projects in Iowa, they're really led by the soil and water conservation districts. Most of them create an advisory committee of key landowners, but not to this extent that you have here on Blackhawk. This is much more involved, much more broad-based. That's more of the common approach. This approach is not that common. We had one years ago in Dubuque. We've had one over by Dyersville, down in Jones County by Anamosa in the past. But when I'm working with groups to develop their project, I just say which direction you want to go, and whichever direction they want to go, I help them. I don't try to steer them in a different direction. But this is not the common way, but it is probably, in my opinion, the best long-term way.
Jack, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
We haven't heard from you much, and I'm just wondering if you'd talk a little bit about your role in the development of the group and the difference that it's made for you personally, and maybe for your neighbors.
Oh, you're looking for Jack Boyer. Never mind.
Yeah, Jack Boyer.
I'm
Sorry,
still
Jack.
on my voice. I'd say that as I've said other times, maybe when we talked at the other time, without Clark's being a champion of this thing, I'm not sure where it would have gone. But certainly my participation on the Tama County Soil and Water, we just have a little small segment of our county that goes into the Blackhawk watershed. But working with, I live very near Rhinebeck and very near the Blackhawk Creek as well. And so it just seemed like a natural thing to get it included in the rest of the Middle Cedar activities. And I thought there was a lot of opportunity there. So certainly talking with neighbors and talking with other people that was on the coalition to see what we could do to try to keep moving this forward.
I have another one for you then, Jack. I have often heard in this work, talking with people, that often people like you who have been using water practices that protect the soil and water for a long time get discouraged because you work so hard, and then maybe the person next to you or down the road isn't doing that, and your land may be affected, or it might minimize the work you've gone to. Is that something you've experienced? If so, has this kind of grassroots effort that started made a difference for you?
Everything has to have a boundary. Somewhere you have a boundary, and there's many of these watersheds that will split a farm, and there might be a higher cost share payment if you happen to be in the watershed than if you happen to be out of the watershed. So not only does it maybe place some neighbors against neighbors, but it can, within the same farm, it can, you know, wind up splitting it and making it complicated. So that's a problematic thing. But and so this Blackhawk Creek kind of fills in part of that gap to some degree. But you know, as far as being discouraged because someone else happened to get the funding, or because someone else is either doing it or not doing it, you know, I guess I'm kind of a rebel on that. This just was a mission that I've been on the last 10 years or so on my own farm, and I'll tell the story that I love to tell is that my father-in-law, his parents settled this farm. He was born in the home that we live in, lived for 94 years, having never left, and died in this home. And his mission, or what he wanted to do, is he wanted to leave the farm in better shape than what he received it. And my wife and I share that same philosophy, and we see that protecting our soil for the next generation is part of that legacy.
I guess that's probably a good note to end on. It's about 2:30. Thank you all so much for being part of this event, for staying, for your great questions. And I do hope that we see you next month, December 17th. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Nancy. Good job.
Thank you.